People at Wayside were going to have the best stories in the world. I just knew that. And then I found a photograph of my mother married at the Wayside Chapel. It's so hard when a parent has died to know definite truths about them that you can hang on to. And sometimes the choices they make, like where to get married, is just an absolute boon. I put out a call for people who got married there over the past 5 decades. There was such a great response. I interviewed dozens of people across Australia and dramatised their stories into a play called Wayside Bride.
Will you love her, honour and keep her?
We'd see this lovely gentleman, the Reverend Ted Noffs, and he'd stop and introduce himself to people. And you'd see it late at night, people sheltering in shop doorways, you know, and he'd be there helping them. And I thought, what a wonderful person.
Let us pray.
If you were a Hindu marrying a Catholic or a Buddhist marrying a Baptist, people have used the phrase, Ted was the only show in town.
And I think it's incredible that a chapel, a church, would allow another religious practice to come into their space.
Let's not pretend it's just these sweet weddings in King's Cross with a kooky pantsuit wearing minister. These were people making profound, challenging and sometimes life-threatening choices. And that's scary and brave, and I wanted to be amongst that.
You schedule a wedding every half an hour?
I would say, oh, I'm making a play about the Wayside Chapel, and people would say, oh yeah, my grandmother's next door neighbour was married there. There is this truth, there is this connection running under this city, and it takes artists to find that and reflect it back to our communities. We collect all those things and we hold them up as a mirror to ourselves and say, look at what we did, look at who we really are.
Welcome everybody to the Wayside Chapel.
As far as truth is concerned, as far as our understanding of life is concerned, there is immense diversity. There is immense possibility.
As a queer person who also attends a uniting church, I became really interested in the intersection of where the church had actually had a history in Australia with social justice movements.
The church accuses me of being wishy-washy in my theology and philosophy because I accept everybody, and particularly I accept people at the time of marriage.
It is really interesting how many of the institutions that we now admire and are interested in were set up in the late 60s, early 70s. It was a time, I think, when people, if they didn't like something, said, we're going to make something new ourselves. Ted Noffs was a Methodist who became a Uniting Church minister, who founded the Wayside Chapel in 1964. Before their time in the Cross, Ted and his wife Margaret worked in the United States. That was where there was a really big culture in the church, a radical movement of relating to the poor. So as far as I understand, Ted got kind of radicalised and captured by this idea of the church reaching out beyond its congregation, basically, and into the streets, and then came back here, and the Wayside Chapel was offered to him. There was a kind of characterisation of the cross as people who were dropouts and that people weren't contributing to society. Anyone who's really alive and alive in their faith looks around. What is the need? Who are the people who are here with us? And how can we relate to them? So then Ted started inviting them to Sunday services, and then there was a coffee house set up. They had a little theatre where they'd put on plays, they'd have musicians playing guitar, and I think he just made it a welcome and open space. One of the things about Ted is that he was constantly listening to his community and he was speaking back to them and he was creating spaces where they could feel comfortable.
Now, the question time is an arena where the Buddhist, the Muslim, the anarchist, the humanist, all of these people are able to come together and in a dialogue discover their common humanity.
I've been reading a lot about freedoms lately, freedoms for youth in demonstrations and so forth. It makes you wonder whether there's too much freedom and too much permissiveness. Do you think there's too much permissiveness here?
Let me say this, that we're accused all the time of being a permissive people. And in society, the issue of our time across the world, politically, religiously, economically, and every other way, is the question of authority. You only have to see it in the political circle. For example, who would have thought a little place like Cuba or North Vietnam could have shaken its fist at the mighty power of the United States of America?
Australia in the 1960s was very conservative. So if you were a divorcee, or if you were a Hindu marrying a Catholic, or a Buddhist marrying a Baptist, people have used the phrase, Ted was the only show in town. During all this social change and upheaval, I think that Sydney at that time must have been an incredibly fun place to be. I mean, there is a moment before things become mainstream that there's a delicious kind of underground flavour to things.
So your parents were really quite flamboyant.
Very flamboyant.
Where do you think that came from?
I have no idea.
As it became more widely known, a lot of people in showbiz and fashion got married at the chapel, including Chandor and Del Ponasami.
My parents were socialites. A lot of people would have expected them to get married at St Andrews or something like that, whereas, St Andrews didn't accept them because my father was a Hindu and my mother was a Christian. My parents met at a party of my uncle's. Mum was a window dresser for Katie's, head window dresser, and Dad did the accounts. He was in the accounts department for Katie's. Wayside was a very progressive place. It was the only place that would marry them. Both families weren't happy. Neither of my grandparents, either side, went to the wedding, which was unfortunate. Yeah, I suppose it was a time where the Indian side of the family expected Dad maybe to marry someone Indian, and Mum's side of the family maybe expected her to marry someone that wasn't Indian. They were quite rebellious, and it was the 60s and they wanted to do what they wanted to do. The wedding day had quite a few little stories that go along with it. The procession on Hugh Street, which had a white Jag that was covered in garlands, the garlands stained all the Jag. And then, of course, my parents had a pink poodle, and the pink poodle was, dyed fresh for the day. At the reception, the pink poodle jumped up on Kamal's brand new silk suit and stained him pink. They gave each other the little pendant thing that the Hindus do, and they did the ceremony. That in itself is incredible, that a chapel, a church, would allow another religious practice to come into their space. My parents have always, brought us up to be inclusive and accepting of, same-sex, trans, anyone that wanted to be the way they are, they can be the way they are. I can't imagine my father coming from Singapore and then going to boarding school, ever had, much of, that kind of influence on him growing up. I think that those influences would have, come from being in King's Cross.
My mother, she got a very good offer to work at the Rex Hotel at the Cross. And she said, why don't we just have a bit of an adventure and move from Manly and find a rental place at the Cross. So that's what we did. And we never looked back, we loved it. Then, in those days, there was poets and authors and actors and singers and dancers and all sorts of people. It was very bohemian. We'd never sort of experienced that, and we thought it was wonderful. And people were friendly, and it was just a lovely place to be.
Before her adventures in the cross, Ursula Zuffo had been married to a conman and bigamist.
After that, just had a few love affairs here and there and around the place. I just couldn't trust men. After that, I was completely... If they'd tell me anything else, I wouldn't believe them. And then I met Sergio when I was 30. And he had been married, and my mother said, I don't know, we better get him checked. She said, because an Italian man, they don't often divorce. So she got some private eye. She got a private eye, or whatever you call private detective, to look into Sergio, because she said, no, it's strange, an Italian man, they don't usually get divorced. Well, they don't, you know, not in those times, they didn't anyway. I think it was about 6 months after we met, we got engaged, and then he was sort of wanting to marry in the Catholic Church. Well, I didn't really want to do that, but he wasn't allowed, we found out anyway. In those days, a divorced person was not given the right to marry. So I said, well, why don't we try this little chapel? We could get married there.
May your married life be filled with all the happiness that you both seek after.
Quite a lot of the women talked about being lapsed in whatever religion it was that they were marrying into or out of. And yet they wanted to go to a church. They wanted a minister to marry them. They needed to officiate, but they could have gone to the marriage registry office, and they didn't.
Sergio's parents wanted nothing to do with an Australian girl. They didn't wish to come to the wedding. I told them about this little Wayside Chapel. It was a dreadful little place, and it wasn't suitable for their son to marry in such a place. But we just took no notice of that carry on, and we got married. It was wonderful. It was a Saturday, 1st of February 1969. Lovely day of weather and everything. My brother gave me away because I wasn't really in contact with my father much of a way then. I didn't want any bridal situation. I just sort of had a plain sort of night-timey sort of dress, except for the hair. Well, I had my gay friend, and I think he brought every piece of hairpiece he had and he put it in my hair. Hair was in. The more hair, the better. I did choose because of the Reverend Tednoffs himself, because I admired him. The work he did and the man he was, I admired him, and I thought, that's a place I would like to get married in. He was so gentle, and you could see that he loved his work. I think he loved seeing it when two people were in love, and he knew what we'd gone through to get there.
There are no words that we can ever speak, O God, that can thank you enough for all the love that you have put within the hearts of these two young people for each other. We ask now that you will take them and bless them, so that the words which they speak to each other may be spoken with love and with integrity. And finally, may your married life be filled with great happiness and great joy.
Some of the women I spoke to, they actually started to want to go to the Wayside Chapel because other people thought that that was a provocative place to have been married as well.
People were funny. If they knew that you had married at the Wayside Chapel, some people would say, oh, what? You know, they say, that man. I mean, I just couldn't believe that people would think that way about the place.
Most people are agreed that something has happened to the cross over the past 10 years.
In the 70s, hard drugs came into the cross.
You could feel it sort of in the air in the streets, and you could see a different type of person was getting around. It got a bit scary.
The police, had questions about whether the chapel was a place where all the crims could meet each other and hook up for jobs. TED was all about harm reduction and prevention over punitive measures.
Too many boys and girls who are involved with drugs, quite accidentally, they are picked up and they're punished, they're given severe sentences, but the people behind, somewhere in the background, evade the police detection units very often altogether.
He was always around in the night, he always was, but he was around a lot more because there were so many people just collapsing around the place and also going up to the wall the whole time. It was called The Wall, and it was right near St Vincent's Hospital up at the end of Darlinghurst Road, and the young boys would stand there to offer themselves to guys who would come along in cars, a lot of middle-aged men, strangely enough, and he was up there all the time. They're trying to encourage them to maybe come back to the Wayside Chapel or just, get away from the wall. But they were already needing the money for drugs.
The church didn't like him because he was preaching this kind of more social justice message. They felt that it should be more saving their souls rather than saving their bodies. He saw this as hypocritical.
I think the most important thing that I have to say to the church is this: look, you teach me Jesus died for all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, all are precious in his sight. Jesus died for all the children of the world. You taught me that as in a Sunday school, in theological college. But when I live up to that, you charge me with heresy.
People who actually are at the forefront of change, they have very, very hard lives. Like the things that we now take for granted, when they're first mooted, are utterly, utterly negated. So we know that Ted was a great supporter of the Aboriginal freedom rides. We know that Ted advocated on behalf of gay people at that time when homosexuality was still illegal. Utterly negated.
I can't put people into little boxes or little categories and say, you're in and you're out. That's unthinkable. That's not only un-Australian, it's un-Christian. To take all the photographs you wish, move around the chapel, just make yourselves completely at home.
Vicky and Maria were two ladies that wanted to get married, and one worked as a truck driver for Katie's and the other one worked as a nurse at St Vincent's Hospital. My parents both being friends, my dad gave away one bride and my mother was maid of honour to the other bride. It was against the law to be in a same-sex relationship, and for the Wayside Chapel to embrace it, like, what an amazing place.
It's really different looking at the history of something. It's not just everybody suddenly agrees that we're all just going to be nice to gay people and people of different races. You fight for that. And I feel like that Ted really inspires me with his resilience and his determination. Something that has emerged through my research, actually, there was a big thing in the late 60s and 70s of women who were extremely hostile to the mainstream church, which had constricted and controlled their lives in ways that they really wanted to rebel against. And I absolutely know that my mother was part of that swathe of women not wanting to fulfil their working class sort of obligations to be wives and mothers. My mother was married when she was 18. She was pregnant with me, and then she had another child, my brother, and then she was divorced when I was 5. She remarried my stepfather when I was 7. My memories of that day are really, actually, I've got to say, more in the preparation. I remember sitting, like many people do, watching their beautiful young mothers put on makeup. I mean, it's one of our earliest memories. There's a photo of me and I'm looking sort of very proper. I've got little gloves on and little shoes, but I do look quite confounded, I think. I look overwhelmed because, you know, it's all these strange people. It's my beautiful mother marrying this man who I know, but I don't know what it's going to be. Thinking about it has given me a real insight into how children must experience change. So I judged my mother for all the things that children want a mother to be, rather than really who she was. She would come to school events late. She wasn't dressed conservatively like the other mothers. She would wear the latest Vogue creation. When I got home from school, there was not, food for me to eat. I judged her as a woman and as a mother, and I thought that she was depriving me in some way by being different. And it's only now that I look back and think, wow, she was fantastic. I actually know now that she was much more of a radical in terms of social justice and change. But women like my mother, from working class suburbs in Sydney, like in Cogra, where she grew up, she didn't have choices. She wasn't angry at me, which is what kids always think. She was frustrated with the choices she could make. My mother never spoke about her first marriage, and I knew not to ask, then didn't ask, and then it was too late. She died when she was 49. I accessed my mother's divorce papers that I'd never thought to do. And in those papers, she alleges certain things about my father, my biological father, to do with domestic violence and to do with abuse that she suffered. And that was the reason for the divorce. I feel shocked by how much I judged my mother. It's an incredibly humbling thing to actually look back and go, I had no idea what you're going through. I think that storytellers, there's a way we look back on our lives, and for me, this whole process of learning to let go of my judgment of my mother has been incredibly joyful and liberating. The beautiful thing is that my mother and I were both driven by social change, but we didn't get to discover that about each other. By the 1980s, Ted had married thousands of couples, and he continued to minister at weddings and naming ceremonies. But at the end of the decade, Ted had a massive stroke and was unable to work. His wife, Margaret Knopfs, took over at the Wayside.
I only met his wife, Margaret, a couple of times. She was a marvellous woman. She stuck by him. She was wonderful with people.
Now we're not only doing it because of the vision, we're not only doing it because of something we want to do, but we're all doing it for Ted too.
Ideas percolate and they take a long time to come to fruition, and people sacrifice their lives and their health. I think the intense work took its toll on him. Ted died in April 1995.
He was a friend of the homeless, Aborigines, ethnic groups, bikies, gays, lesbian, the ordinary people in the street.
Ted Knopf's children and grandchildren, especially Matt Knopfs, continue Ted's vision and have a new way of thinking about what it means to work with people by the wayside.
Then I'll welcome everyone, explain a little bit about the magic of this present moment. And
John Owen is now the CEO and pastor of the Wayside Chapel, and the radical theology of marrying whomever you like for love is still very much on the agenda.
I've got one especially for your wedding.
Just arrived. Also the symbol. Beautiful.
I've been really inspired that that baton has been passed to this new generation, if I can put it that way.
Love creates community. Love is a mysterious act. Now, these two beautiful boys who are joining together today, are we ready to do this?
We are only 7 years since the plebiscite, and I think that one of the grooms made the point that he didn't even grow up thinking that weddings would be on his radar. The idea of publicly declaring your love with your parents there and, you know, a whole room cheering pretty loudly.
It's all very cool now, the Wayside Chapel. And I'm sad that Ted isn't around to be one of the cool people, like he always was. He had such a beautiful heart.
I'm so proud to have a connection to this part of our social history. I've realised I'm one of those wayside people who value community, value connection. The freedoms our communities have now were really hard won, and social change is brought about by really courageous individuals. I think the truth of that is something that we really need to remember right now.